Hey everybody, welcome back. Jesse here for Three Prong Gaming. And in the last episode, we went ahead and we set up a few basic blueprints. We got a game mode, game state, player state, and we got this landscape, and we just kind of set up the world in preparation for everything else. If you haven't seen that yet, go ahead and check out the video that is playing in the upper left-hand corner right now and get caught up. All right, so now that you're all caught up, let's get this thing started, huh? There's a couple things I want to mention. This is about a 25, maybe 26 minute long video, so I want to try to cram in a few things, make it feel like I accomplished something today. So I'm going to try to race through it a little bit. Hopefully I don't lose you guys in this. At any point during this tutorial series, if there is something that you want to see implemented, a feature, a function, something like that, let me know, leave me a comment, and we'll talk about it, and maybe it's something we can put into this game. Also, if you want to see the game take a specific turn, like be something a little bit different, let me know. We can also talk about that, because there's going to be a certain point in here where most of the functionality is the same for different types of games. So, for example, we can continue doing the Tropico style like I originally planned, or at that point we could really kind of break off and do something more along the lines of Age of Empires. If you let me know, I want to keep you guys interested, so whatever you guys want to do, we can look into doing that, as long as, well, I'm familiar with how to do it, but shouldn't be too big of a deal. Just let me know, leave me comments. Let's go ahead and get this thing started. First thing, last week, there's one thing I forgot to do. Go ahead and select your landscape here. What we need to do is we need to set the Z value to 0. Think of that as being a like sea level. It's just going to make things a whole lot easier if we know our landscape is at a Z value of 0 rather than always trying to compensate for it being at 100. Let's go ahead and drop our player start there, select it, and hit the end key. And then also we need to go into our light mass importance volume and just drop that. You can see it in the back corner right here, how it's kind of above the landscape. We need to drop it just below, not too big of a deal, right about there. That'll work. We'll call that good. Go ahead and save that. Perfect. All right, let's get this thing going. Go into your blueprints folder here. Right click. Now we need to make this, we need to make our camera pawn. This is what we're going to use to move around in the world, to view, pan, tilt, zoom, do all that stuff. We don't need to make it a character because we don't really care about any of the character or movement speeds, any of the movement functions off of a character. So let's just go ahead and make it a pawn. Let's call this camera pawn. Hit enter. And then while we're at it, I told you last video that I was probably going to want to change the name of this as well. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's just name this camera pawn controller. That way we know exactly what this controller is for. Control S to save everything. Then we need to go back into our game mode really quick. Double click that and open it up. We need to change this default pawn class. We need to change this to camera pawn, so that now every time we play the game, it's going to use our camera pawn instead of the top-down player character. Okay. Go back into blueprints. Let's go ahead and open up our camera pawn. This is going to be really easy. There's not going to be any functionality really that goes into this. Maybe at some point, but as much as I've got code in this game, I haven't really put anything in here. So let's just go ahead and get this set up though. We need a scene. Select scene. Hit enter. We'll just keep the name. Now drag and drop that on top of the default scene root, and that now becomes our default scene root. Click component. We need a static mesh. Select that. Let's name this a sphere. Another component, we need a spring arm. And then lastly, we need a camera. Now, in order for everything to work as it's supposed to, we'll just keep the name of camera, is everything needs to kind of be parented to one another. So take your spring arm, drop it into your sphere. Take your camera, drop it into spring arm. So now what we're going to do is select your sphere, change the static mesh from none, type in, you guessed it, sphere. Two items pop up here. We got the material sphere and the shape sphere. There is a difference between the two, and I went and looked at them. The material sphere, the pivot point is actually in the center of the mesh, whereas in the shape sphere, the pivot point is at the bottom of the mesh. Now that's going to make a difference because we're going to use this sphere, which is why we parent it all right here, because we're going to use the sphere to rotate the camera and the spring arm. So when we move the sphere, anything that is a child of the sphere will move with it as well. So it's just going to make things look better and a whole lot more fluid if we have the pivot point in the center of our sphere. So select material sphere, and there we go. It's a little big. It's not that big of a deal. Eventually, we're not going to see this in the game. For now, we've got it visible. We will eventually make this hidden in the game. But for testing sakes, we'll leave it visible. But I want to make this a little bit smaller. So go ahead in the scale of the sphere, type in 0.35, 0.35, 0.35. All right, there we go. Now select your spring arm. You can see your spring arm right there with the camera parented to it. You can see over here that the default target arm length is 300. We want to make this a little bit bigger. Go ahead and change this to 1500, and it moves it way out there quite a ways. That's not a bad thing. We're going to have a zoom in and zoom out. Go ahead and head back to the sphere. One thing I like to do is, and make sure it's movable. It should be by default, but just make sure it's movable. One thing I like to do in the location is set it Z to 100. I kind of like this to float above the terrain. You don't need to do this. But I kind of like to do that, especially if we decide we want to make this kind of follow the contour of the landscape. It'll just make it nice having it float above it rather than through it. But you don't need to do that if you really don't want to. That is going to be it. Yeah, the spring arm. Oh, no, we need to go back into the sphere. I'm sorry. Location, rotation. We need to change this rotation of the y-axis to -7, 0. And there we go. This is going to be our default view looking down. Sorry if you heard my dog shaking in the background. This is going to be our default view, 70 degrees, negative 70 degrees down in the world. I find this works pretty good. Still gives you kind of a nice 3D look to it. But we're going to have the pan and tilt. So you're going to be able to, we'll probably bring it up to maybe 80 degrees and maybe go down as far as 30 degrees. We'll see how that goes. But this will be our default view is 70 degrees. Compile, save it, and yeah, now that is it for this blueprint. Close out game mode as well. Go ahead and open up your camera pawn controller. Throw that up in here. Click Open Full Blueprint Editor. Drag that back up in there. Now we need a begin play. There it is right there. Select it. We're going to have a bunch of stuff that's going to have to come off this begin play that's going to have to happen. So knowing that, right off the bat, let's just go ahead and add a sequence node. Okay, now first thing we need to do with this is we need to cast and get a bunch of references. Right now we only need one reference, but eventually there's going to be a whole bunch. So because of that, and to keep things nice, clean, and organized, we're going to go ahead and put it into a macro. But first, let's create the variable. Let's call this, camera pawn ref. All right, come over here, change its variable type to, you guessed it, camera pawn. Okay, and then in the category right here to keep things organized, because this is going to be a pretty large blueprint by the time it's all said and done. Let's keep things organized. Category, let's call this references. There we go. So now anytime we make another reference, we can just put it in the category and it'll all be right there. So macro. If you don't know, the difference between a macro and a function is there's some slight differences. Up front, what you can really see right up front is a macro. When you place macro into the graph and you play the game, play the level, everything inside a macro will actually be thrown into the event graph just like you had actually placed it in the event graph. Also, with macros, you can use features such as delay and timeline. Any time-based feature you can use in a macro, whereas in a function you cannot. There are times for both of them. I use quite a bit, especially in this player controller. I've got a decent amount of both. Some of the time I choose, it's just kind of an arbitrary decision of why I chose a macro over a function or vice versa. But in this case, let's go ahead and create a macro. Let's call this reference casts. Hit enter. Now we will eventually have a whole bunch of references. We only need right at this point, which is the camera pawn. So since we need the camera pawn, we need to right click in here, click player pawn, get player pawn. There it is right there. Select that. Drag off of this and hit cast to camera pawn. There we go. That's pretty much all we're going to need to do. Drag off this input pin right there. Drag it into the input and it'll create a nice little link up for us. Same thing over here. Click this, drag this into the output, and it'll link all that up. Now what we need to do is take your camera pawn reference, drag it, and drop it on top of that right there, and it'll set it for us. Knock that in there. There we go, and that's all we need to do for right now. Eventually we'll just tack onto this at the end, but that's all we need. Compile. Of course, we got a sequence issue there. We haven't actually set up the sequence yet. So let's go back out here and do that right now. Take your reference cast, drag it, drop it in there, hook it up to the then 0. Now we can compile it without any warnings. Save it. Perfect. Easy as pie. All right, so let's go ahead and create a movement component. If you remember from the last episode, we saved some of the axis mappings, most notably the W, A, S, and D movements. That's what we're going to use to be able to move around the world. So let's go ahead and just right-click in here. The one we're going to work on right now is the forward and backwards. So select Move Forward. We need the axis event, not the value. So select the event, and there we go. All right, now if you're in here, if you hold the B key and click into the world, or in the graph, you will get a branch node. Go ahead and hook that branch up. Now for this branch, the check we need to do, we need to create a new variable. Let's call this disable cam nav. Change its variable type to Boolean and select compile. Now drag this and place it into the branch. What this cam nav disable cam nav is, there's going to be a couple points where we may not want to be able to allow the player to move forward or backwards. Like maybe when you're panning, you don't want them to be able to move forward. It just can look kind of hokey. So using this, this will disable this function so you can't move forward as long as that variable is set to true. All right, so first thing we need for this now is we need to create a new function. Click this. We will call this movement speed calculation. Sounds good to me. What this is going to end up doing is we're going to make it so depending on how far zoomed in you are or zoomed out is going to dictate how fast your camera can move through the world. If you're zoomed really far in onto the landscape, you don't want to move very fast. It can get really ugly. It can twitch around and give you some bad frame rates. Likewise, if you're zoomed out, you want to be able to move faster. So we'll use this function to dictate the distance of our zoom and then change our speed accordingly. So what we need here is we need to grab the camera pawn reference, get it, drag off of that, type in spring arm. There we go, get the spring arm. Oops, not that. And then drag off the spring arm, type in length, and you'll get target arm length. So this tells us right now, as default, this target arm length will be 1500. Let's drag off of this, divide a float by a float, and we want to divide that by 100. So what that's doing is at our default value of 1500, divide it by 100, it's going to give us 15. So that's going to be our base movement speed around in the world. I'll explain that a little bit more as we actually implement the speed in a few minutes. But we want to make sure that your speed is clamped. All right, we don't want to go under or over a specific speed. So go ahead and select a clamp as a float. Set its minimum value to 5. We don't want to move any slower than 5. That's already pretty darn slow. And then for now, we don't want to do anything over 20. You can change this. You can make a variable and plug it into here and maybe make it a user option to where they can select the fastest that they can go. That's up to you. Right now, I'm leaving it like this. I'm just going to leave it as a maximum of 20. And that's it. That's all we got to do for this function. What we need to do now is we need to select this. We need an output pin. We'll change the parameter name to move sensitivity. Change its type to a float. Drag this over here and then drag that float right up into there. Go ahead and take a second as a pause break. One last thing we need to do with this is we need to set a few things up into here. Access specifier, it's defaulted to public. we're going to change it to protected. The difference between them is public means any of your blueprints can access this function. Protected means only this blueprint and its children can access the function. And private means only this blueprint can use this function. It's not too big of a deal with this, but it's always good to get in the habit of doing access specifiers for your functions. It can save you a headache down the road. So we're going to set it to protected. We don't want anybody other than this blueprint and maybe its children, if any, to use it. So select this as protected. We're also going to make it a pure function, and I'll show you exactly what a pure function is here in just a minute. And that's it for that. Compile it, save it, head back into the event graph. Now take that new function, drag it, and drop it right in there. So making a pure function, this is exactly what it did. It made it to where it has no execution pins. You don't need to hook it up in the chain of executions. It'll only calculate when it's called upon in the code. All right. And I did get myself a second monitor, so it's making things a little bit easier for me. Yeah, because this isn't easy to remember off the top of my head. So with the second monitor, I can keep everything over there and know exactly where I'm at. We're going to create another macro here, but first we'll go ahead and place it out here, and then we'll turn it into a macro as soon as we place it out here. It just keeps everything organized. If you're not sure if you want to make things function or macro, ultimately, if you're just doing it to clean up your ground, clean up everything out here, you could turn it into a node or a macro, one or the other. I usually just turn it into a macro, keeps it all nice cleaned up. And then plus a macro you can use in another spot within the graph if you so choose. All right, now we need to create another variable here. Let's go ahead and call this one fast. I didn't do that. What happened there? Variable. There we go. Fast move multiplier. Change its type to a float. Compile it so we can set its default value. We will set its default value to 1. We're going to have the ability. We're going to set up the ability to like hold the shift key down and make your camera move faster through the world. That's what this is. So 1's the default because 1 times anything else is the original whole number. So we may change this to 1.5 when you're holding the shift key down, so it'll update the movement speed here. You'll see what I'm talking about. I think I've just confused myself right there. Drag and drop that in the world as a get. Then we need the camera pawn reference. Drag and drop that in as a get as well. Okay. What we need to do now is we need to take the move sensitivity and we need to multiply it float times float. And then we need to take the fast move multiplier. So, like I was saying, your movement speed right now default will be 15 because our arm length is 1500 divided by 15, or by 100 is 15. Now we multiply that by 1, so our base speed is going to be 15. All right, now we need to take this axis value. What the axis value is a number between -1 and 1. It's a normalized number, meaning everything's going to be within that range in a decimal value. So if you don't have some sort of movement component like this, you're going to move really slow through the world. So dragging off of this, let's go ahead and do another multiply. We want to multiply this float value coming off the axis. And this, if you're using just the keyboard, it's either going to be -1, 0, or 1. But if you're using a gamepad with sensitivity, the number can range in between. So we want to multiply that value by our actual speed component here. So if you're using the keyboard and you're moving forward, this value is going to be 1 multiplied by our example 15 here, and your movement speed is going to be 15 units per tick, because a action mapping is ultimately like a tick. It's constantly going to make sure if you're pressing the key or not. Okay, and then with that we also need now to make a vector. Take this, pull this off, and type make vector. We want the regular vector, not the 2D. Make sure it's plugged into the X value. Now from the camera pawn reference, we need to get actor transform. From this transform, let me see. Here's a little bit of magic, all right? Usually moving this way, if we do nothing with this and we don't set this and create this vector here, you're always going to move, when you push the W key to move forward, you're always going to move in the X-axis, the world's X-axis. Well, that's not what we want. We want to move forward the way that the camera is facing. All right, in order to do that, this, like I said, is a magic. Drag off of this transform pin, type in transform direction right there. Click and drag that. This will ensure that the actor transform is taking the vector right here and it's moving it in that direction. In this case, we have it plugged into the X, so it's going to move in the X direction that way. Okay, but we still got a little bit of work to do here with this. Drag off and select break transform. Now we need to take the location of the actor transform and the output value of this direction that we just set up here. Drag off of there. We need to add these values together. Vector plus vector, location, plug it into the bottom one right there. Now it's adding all this together. So it's taking this value, which would be 15 units per tick at our example number, adding it to the actor transform. So if your location is 000, then it's going to add 15 units per tick every time you're using that. So that's what that's doing right there. Now we need to combine this though. We need to go drag off this and we need to make transform. Okay, and we're not doing anything with rotation and scale, so we'll just keep them as default and plug those right in there. And that's ultimately it. I will give you guys a second to look at this in just a minute. What I want to do is I actually want to turn this into macro, select everything but these first three numbers there, right click and select collapse to macro. Like I said, you can collapse the node if you want, but I'm going to select it to collapse to macro. We're going to name this as movement X. Go ahead and jump into this macro real quick. Let's clean it up. Select the input. This top one is the axis value. The next one is move sensitivity. The third float value was the move speed. We'll call it speed multiplier. And then this last one is camera reference. Yeah, there we go. Just makes it easier. So if we do use it elsewhere, we know exactly what needs to be plugged into what. Now take this transform right here, drag it off and plug it into the output of that. Change its name to transform. There we go. Let me clean this up a little bit and give you guys a second to look at it. Yeah. All right, there's your guys' pause break. Go ahead and take a look at it. All right. Now you got that all set up. We can close that out, and that's pretty much it for this. Let's go ahead and compile. Let's hit Control S, make sure everything is saved. What we need to do with this, though, we do need to set, actually we will drag a camera pawn reference. You can use, I'm pointing at my screen like you can see me. You can use the pin off of this if you want to drag up here. I'm not going to. It's not going to make that big of a difference. If you put, a couple hundred of these in this graph, it'll make a difference. You should always try to pull off of a reference you already have, but it's not that big of a deal. Go ahead and pull off this. We need to set actor transform. Just like that. Take the transform off our movement X macro, plug it in there. And now off the false. We want to ensure that disable cam nav is false. In other words, it is not disabled. Plug it in there, and we won't do anything with the true because if it is disabled, we don't want to run anything after that. So take this, run that up there so it looks a little bit cleaner. And that's it. Everything should work now. We should be able to test this. Hit compile, save it. Let's go ahead and we will test it. Hit play. There we go. There's our camera sphere. Push W moves forward. S moves backwards. Nothing else is set up yet, but it does work. There we go. Perfect. Alright, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. The next one, I think what we're going to do is we will finish the movement left and right. We'll get the lateral movement going, which ultimately is going to be about the same as what we have here, slightly different. And then, if possible, maybe start working on some of the panning and tilting, or the zoom. Probably the pan and tilt first, though. We'll see how that goes. Like I said, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, please do me a favor, go down and hit that like button. If you're new to the channel, go ahead and subscribe as well while you're down there liking it. If you didn't see the last video, it should be up there on the screen playing for you there in the upper left-hand corner. And if all goes well, you might even see the next video playing in the upper right-hand corner of this. And if that's the case, go ahead and click on that, and let's jump into the next video. Peace.